the biggest story I think of the week is what's happening in Afghanistan. Basically, President Biden announced a couple months back that he would be pulling back all the United States troops that are stationed in Afghanistan by September 11th. That would mark the 20-year anniversary, right, of the start of the war on terror. And what's happened since is that the Taliban have basically taken over much of the entire country. They just entered the capital, Kabul, and the president of Afghanistan has fled the country. And it seems like the Taliban are pretty much in control. Again, like there's so much nuance to this, right? I'm seeing a lot of anchors and news media outlets cover this in various ways. A lot of people are surprised by the speed at which the Taliban have been, able to take over a lot of these cities. But honestly, if you'd been following the situation like I had, I'm not really surprised to see what's happening. And just before we dive in and have a conversation about this, like I said before, I think it's really good to just know the overall history of the area. So I don't want to go back, all the way thousands of years, but basically, if we want to talk about the 19th century or the 20th century, basically the British tried to control Afghanistan. They were successful at first, but then they were not successful. And, long story short, basically in the 1970s or the 1980s, I shall say, the Soviet Union basically took control of Afghanistan. And what happened was that the Soviet Union took control of Afghanistan, and the United States obviously was, in this Cold War. And so they supported insurgent groups. They were known as the Mujahideen in Afghanistan that fought back against the Soviet control. And the US didn't directly send any troops. They sent military aid through other countries like Pakistan. They sent in more money. And what happened was the Mujahideen were successful in terms of eliminating the Soviets out. And so once the Soviets were out, a small faction of a lot of Islamist extremists was formed called the Taliban. They're not really Islamic. They're just Islamic in name. Nothing they do is Islamic. And they basically controlled Afghanistan for the next 4 to 5 years. And obviously when 9/11 happened, the US intelligence agencies discovered that, a portion of Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden was hiding out in Afghanistan. And so they invaded Afghanistan. And for a short period of time, it seemed like the invasion had been successful, but 20 years later, nothing has been accomplished, essentially. The country is still doing, is still basically at what it was back in 2001 and before that. And I just want to give you guys some statistics, right, to just emphasize how bad the United States has basically done in Afghanistan. So approximately $2 trillion have been spent in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the very, it's sad, right, about the financing information about the war is that the entire, almost all of this financing has been done through debt. And so, usually if for war periods, a lot of governments, they either issue war bonds or they increase taxes. For these wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, what's happened is that the entire thing has been financed through debt. And the interest on this debt is set to be about $6.5 trillion by 2048. So the interest will be basically more than the initial debt accrued by 2048. And again, most of this is going to be taken on by the US taxpayers. In terms of US service members lost in Afghanistan, 2,448. In terms of the Afghan police forces and military forces, approximately 66,000 people have died. The percentage of Afghani's teenage girls that are able to even read today is 37%, which is just astounding. And just for some perspective, in previous wars, let's say the Korean War, right? President Truman temporarily had to raise taxes by 92% for the top tax rate levels, right? Same thing with the war in Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson, under his administration, financed some of that through increase in tax payments. George Bush cut taxes for the top income earners by 8%. And so my point is the US has spent a shit ton of money on this and nothing has been accomplished. There's obviously a variety of reasons why the US has been unsuccessful, partly because Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. If you're a student of history like me, you know well enough that no empire has really been able to, have a strong foothold in Afghanistan. Somehow, every single force has basically failed to, to take the land of Afghanistan, and so it's called the graveyard of empires. But I just want to get your perspective on this. What do you guys think the U.S. did wrong? Was it morally justified, and where do you see this going?
So first of all, I have a question.
Mhm.
And maybe I don't know if you know about this, but what has the Taliban done now? Are they trying to establish some sort of government or some sort of like way to rule or over the people, or what? Do you know what's going on right now?
Yeah, so still a lot of things are still a little bit unclear, but what they have started to do is, again, they have like their mouthpieces, their propaganda press people saying, "Oh, we don't really plan on uh, doing drastic changes." But what they've, I'll give you a basic example. So there's beauty salons in Kabul, right? And they have like, they have like, advertisements of women, like, showing to using their beauty products, etc. So a lot of the Taliban forces started painting over them, and they basically are going to go back to how Afghanistan was pre 9/11, which was obviously like very stringent rules and regulations. And it's very crazy because the way the Taliban make money is through, opium trades, drug trafficking, kidnap payments, ransom. I mean, there's estimates that they made like $400 billion in opium drug trafficking, and so they, have a lot of wealthy backers, wealthy individual donors. Again, like I said, they make most of their money through drug trafficking, other illicit means, and so they use, uh, you know, uh, very stringent policies and regulations to come off as Islamic, but they're not really Islamic, right? It's just a facade to back up or recruit more soldiers to stand united. And so far for them, it has worked, right? They have this sense of morale that they're fighting against the West, they're fighting against the US, and they're fighting for Islam, but they're not Islamic. As I said, nothing to do is Islamic at all. And
I just
they're just, go ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like I don't know why we should have been out like 10 years ago. It seems like I don't know. Even I feel like years ago people were saying, "What are we doing there? What are we doing there? Nothing's being accomplished." And I don't know why we're just going out now. Even after maybe after they killed Osama bin Laden, they're like, "Okay, we'll leave now" or something. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish more. They're trying to establish a government. Like, what? I don't know what they were trying to do there, but it just seems like it's a little too late now to leave. I mean, it's still good we left, but it just feels like it's a
Weren't they
little too
trying
late.
to establish like a US democracy to try to like create a makeshift democracy like we have over there and attempt to benefit them? But in my opinion, I don't think that should even happen. I think the culture of the United States versus the Middle East is completely
It's just
different.
yeah, it's not gonna mix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense. People here act differently, your attitudes differently. And not necessarily, I don't think a tyranny is any useful, but I don't believe that maybe a democracy would be the best for them, or maybe even a makeshift democracy for them would be better, not what we have. I think everywhere should be dealt with differently just based on how the people are and what the people actually want. They didn't even want what we were giving them. That's the craziest part to me. We were giving we were giving a country something that we thought was good for them, yet they did not want that. It's insane.
Yeah,
Exactly.
kind of reminds me of Vietnam a little bit too. you know, it's that whole
Well,
dynamic with the
yeah.
US just trying to go on to other people and just trying to, establish our culture onto
Well,
them.
the USSR was trying to do the same thing, right? So I think we're just
Yeah.
fighting our battle
That
through
was like the Cold
Vietnam.
War, I guess,
It's it's a Cold War.
Yeah.
But
It's
yeah,
it's
go
this
ahead.
concept called helping them help themselves, right? And it never really works out. You can't really help someone help themselves. It doesn't make any sense to me. I
You can
think,
offer, right? But you can't
right.
force that.
Right. And it's been America's longest war. It's 20 years, like trillions of dollars. I mean, like I saw somebody, a tweet by a comedian, he said that America can't even figure out their own schools and healthcare system, and we spend $2 trillion in some other country trying to help them, right?
Doesn't make
Like
sense.
it doesn't make any sense. And I think it's part of a bigger conversation, right? This military industrial complex that
100%.
keeps, right, that keeps on like saying, oh no, we need more forces there, we can't leave. Look at, and they use these moral arguments, which don't get me wrong, the moral repercussions of US withdrawal are huge. The Taliban don't care about any sort of moral, so they're going to slaughter everyone who supported the US. They're going to slaughter or basically assassinate everyone who acted as a translator or helped the US Army forces in any way. So the moral repercussions are huge, but at what point does the US justify, the continuation of this waste of tax dollars and just an incoherent policy? I feel like the US were trying to build out the Afghani army like the United States Army, which is, backed by technology and a lot of aerial support. And that's one of the reasons why the Afghani army failed, right? Is because the United States decision makers were making a model out of the US Army. They wanted the Afghanistan army to, be similar to the US Army, but that just can't work, right? You have to have a very more nuanced strategy. And again, I'm no military expert, but we interviewed Ty Smith, right? The Navy SEAL who served in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he said the same thing we're saying. What did we accomplish, right? Those places are exactly the same as they were. And it just seems as if you look at history, like a lot of strong countries and powerful nations think that they know better than other countries, and it's this vanity, this proud belief, and this delusion that we alone can fix it, and when what we're doing is right, and it's not going to be as hard as other people say. So I just again,
what do you think about this? So we're talking about how the opium, obviously there's an opium line through the Middle East, and a lot of wars have happened because of that drug trade. And I guess it's still technically nothing's proven, but it's pretty obvious that it's kind of happening. That, I mean, it's been proven that the United States has been involved with the war on drugs, and they've been involved on the other side of the hand where they kind of dealt with the drugs, right, through subsidiary parties. And so what do you think about that? Do you think a lot of this war has been because of that money from opium? Obviously, it's the #1 drug in the world to produce the amount of capital that it's produced. And obviously it's happening through the Middle East. We've been in the Middle East. This war is going on for ages, and there's really no purpose. But the only point of being there would possibly be that opium. Like, that's the only light, I'd say, at the US's end of the tunnel. What do you think about that?
No. So the way the Taliban make money is through the opium. But in terms of a question why the US is there, well, the US had a lot of like contractual obligations, right? Like military contracts.
I'm not asking why they're there. I'm asking, do you think that this opium is involved? You don't think so?
No. I think that's how the Taliban make the money. Again, like I don't know the specific circumstances of on the ground, what happens in Afghanistan. Obviously, there's illicit drug making all over the world. There's illicit drug trafficking all over the world. Obviously, the Taliban, that's like one of the primary sources of revenue. I don't think the U.S. Benefits anything from it. No, I do think they benefit. Obviously, the big military contractors, right? They benefit from our weapons they develop, right? It's like a constant source of revenue for the last 20 years. All these military contractors, they just like go to the U.S. and be like, "Hey, you need weapons, right? We'll make them for you." Boom. And the defense budget, like I think we've discussed this on the podcast, is around $800 billion, which is just insane to me. So
yeah, I remember in one of my econ classes, we're talking about the budget for the military and how it's so ridiculous how the military will not only give this, $800 billion. That's already a lot of money, right? But say the Navy, say their portion, let's say 1/4 of this, 200 billion, just as an example. If they use 100 billion that year, if they don't go ahead and use 100 billion by the end of the next fiscal year, they won't receive that. They'll only receive half of that amount, which is 100 billion the next year. And so what will the Navy do? They want the entire budget, right? And so they'll go ahead and mass produce. And what they'll do is they'll go into the ocean and they'll just send off like rockets. They'll send off like grenades, and they'll like just completely absorb that budget and just use it, and use that money to produce these weapons and arbitrarily use them into the oblivion, nothing. So
waste,
it's
right?
just, it's a waste. That's exactly how you describe it, a waste. And that's taxpayers' dollars that's just going to waste, which I am not okay with.
Exactly. And I think a lot of veterans were saying like what we dedicated all this time and effort, right, to the country of Afghanistan, what was it all of it for if our leaders, right, those people in positions of power who made those strategic decisions or the overall strategy, if they weren't clear about this whole thing from the beginning, why were they, giving giving service members a false sense of hope. Why were they giving them these different missions that amounted to obviously nothing? And the Taliban just took back control of the country. It kind of reminds me of this Afghani proverb. It basically says, you may have the watches, but we have the time. And if you look at history about, like I was saying, Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. That's basically what happened, right? The U.S. came in to the country. They didn't understand the culture, the different ethnicities, the different practices, and they basically took this sword and the power of the gun, and they thought they were seeking revenge, right, from Al Qaeda, from Osama bin Laden. By the way, the United States trained Osama bin Laden back in the 1980s. The CIA was really big on helping the Mujahideen back, as I said, in Afghanistan to help fight off the Soviets. So I just think that, President, now what's fascinating to see is the political implications of this, because people are saying, Biden should not have pulled out all the troops, that it's his fault that, he pulled out all the troops. And some people are saying, well, Donald Trump already had, an establishment of a deal with the Taliban that the U.S. would eventually pull out troops, but they're saying that the way Biden did it so immediately and with a certain deadline, it wasn't the best way to do it. I honestly think that at a certain point in time, this was inevitable. The Taliban had already been slowly gathering the control of the surrounding land, and eventually they sped up that operation when President Biden announced it. But I think it was inevitable. I think Biden made the right call. I think what will be cowardly of him to do now is if he goes back and says, oh, I'm not abiding by my deadline of September 11. I'm going to continue to add more troops, and maybe we'll do it next year. So I don't think he'll do that, but if he does that, that'll be cowardly of him. I like his decision to pull back troops because at the end of the day, the war has to end. And it's sad to say, but Biden is going to be the fall guy. I mean, Biden is going to have to live with the consequences of a decision. And it's like, I don't know how to deal with the morality aspect of it, because obviously, a lot of people, a lot of children, families, and women are going to die. And it's, I just don't know how to think about that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a deep question, and I feel like we could talk about that for literally a whole hour, the whole moral question, underlining behind the whole war. But